thought I have some questions here, but if you want to take the lead, that's actually what I was hoping to do, is just kind of generate a conversation among everyone. So it's not, a question and answer kind of thing.
And then you jump in with those questions when you need to direct us.
Yeah, there's a few, topics like AGH, the school system, different specific incidents that I'd bring up, but I'd rather have it be more of a natural conversation than me asking everyone questions. So,
well, I would start out by saying how intrigued I am with the thought that we were able to get together in the first place. It was unheard of for African Americans and Caucasian Americans to get together to form any kind of formal group to do work for this county. So I'm not sure who actually started us together. Unless it was Bev Jones.
Bev Jones, Joan Henry.
That's right.
The original was Terry Ault, who was a faculty wife, or maybe her husband was a student. And they were involved with the students for equal rights. And when the students were having a problem getting backing, and so Terry thought that getting the women together might be something that would be useful at that point. So she talked to Pat Creel, who is no longer with us, but she and Pat, whose husband was in the religion department, got together, and Pat included me, and we sat down and talked about the feasibility of getting faculty wives together. And so I called in Joan Henry, who had just quit smoking, and it's been on my conscience ever since, because she got immediately involved in the whole idea and sort of took off from there. And we decided to try to get together as many faculty wives as we could, just to see who was interested and what we might manage to have happen. And we met in what was the Student Union second floor library one night, and we had this amazing turnout. There must have been 40 to 60 people there. I can't remember exactly now, but it was full of interest and enthusiasm, and then it just took off from there.
Do you remember how African American women were brought into that?
I'm trying to think, because
I remember we had, was it at the Presbyterian Student Center? And we invited a whole group of you to come and tell us what it was like to be an African American, well, in those days, a Negro, in Gainesville. And we were just absolutely thunderstruck at that. Parallel to the Gainesville Women for Equal Rights, or a little bit before that, was the Human Relations Council, which was the local branch of the Southern Regional Council. And we had been meeting at the Negro Library the third Sunday of every month for, we started in 1958, I guess. And so a lot of the members then from the Human Relations Council came over to GWER. That was Ann McGee and LaCade Banks and Donna Coward.
Mabel Dorsey.
Cora Roberson. That whole, and we meet at the Negro Library where the covers were torn off the books and crayons, and anything that wasn't fit for the white library went over there. And so that core of women put together this meeting, and they invited their friends. Well, they were all involved in it, and they told the faculty wives all of the problems of living in this segregated community. And these are problems that we had been working on. When I look back on it, it was so patronizing. The African American people would come to our Sunday meeting with their problems, and then we white folks would go and talk to the city commission and the county commission. It was interesting to see that change, and that really changed with the Gainesville Women for Equal Rights, where African Americans were talking to the city commission and the county commission together with us.
That's how we got that name.
Yes.
Remember, those damn women are coming again? That was what they called us. Well, Cora, you said-
I'm glad we're speaking the language of that day, where we'll be using the word white, Negro, and colored. Because I remember when all the water fountains and restrooms and what have you, you could go to the courthouse right downtown, but they didn't allow you to go to the different stores. They didn't allow you to go in there. But in the public places, they had the word of colored.
Yes,
And that
for
those
water
are the only kind of
fountains.
places you could go in.
And what had just been built was the new J. Hillis Miller Health Center, and they had the black
Colored.
and white restrooms.
Colored.
Colored restrooms.
Yes, colored.
It's colored during that time.
And water fountains right on every floor.
And I want to talk some about that, but I was really trying to remember all of the ways we divided ourselves up into committees, because I know committees did the hard work. They went out and forged ahead because I was on the healthcare committee. But there was an education committee, and did we have some, what else? Employment, yes.
Yeah.
And voter registration.
Registration, voter registration. Tutoring, absolutely, absolutely. And to me, the power was there because people were on those committees who had vested interest and knowledge about what it took to make that work. And not only, I think that our role was in coming back in committee and putting down the next step, and then gathering the resources that it took to move to the next step, but then selling it to the folk who you just said we need to go and speak with. And I just look back on that era as really self-affirming for me, having always had a big mouth in school and being always allowed to just say it. I always had the feelings back to the time when I stopped letting white kids run me off the sidewalk, walking all the way across town. Oh, one day I was not having that anymore, and we had that discussion. And I didn't have to have it anymore because they knew if they came out there what would happen. Well, I did all that as a teenager, but as an adult, there was no place to go to make a difference, it seemed, until GWER. I became a member of GWER. I look back on it thinking, I know that's where I needed to be, and I know the women that were there were the women who gave me the strength to go and do those things.
And
I think
we
we gave each other strength
That's
because
true.
all of us were weak in some ways.
Yes.
And some of us were more vulnerable than others. And I think that one of the telling things was how many teachers who were Negro teachers
Yes.
who were whose jobs were threatened,
Yes.
who came and stood up for what they believed and were able to do so. Now the
Yes.
rest of us were once removed
Yes.
from being fired
Yes.
and having taken volunteer jobs from which we were
not going to work.
we were not employed, so nobody could fire us.
I remember when I was teaching at Aquin Jones, it was then elementary and high school, so it wasn't Aquin Jones, it was Lincoln, a later change to Aquin Jones. We used to get, it was a time when you were supposed to be reappointed for the next year. And when they passed that form out, they had down near the bottom the organizations that you are affiliated with. And GWER, I believe, was on there, in NAACP, and it was suggested that we not check the ones of GWER and NAACP. But I remember that I checked both of them, and they were looking for me to be fired. But nothing happened because I was going to test. I was sort of like
You were hoping to get it.
I was going to test it and see what they were going to do about it. I'm a member now. What are you going to do about it? And Ann McGee was one of those persons too.
Yes.
And Gladys Alexander was working in speech therapy, and she went around to various schools.
Yes.
So I don't know. But she probably had to sign one of those same sheets. I think maybe all black teachers, I guess. But I know we did it over at Lincoln, which is now Aquin Jones. We had to sign.
Well, you put your jobs on the line.
Yeah.
Boy, what a lot of courage.
A lot of courage. And, I think hearing those issues discussed in our meetings and allowing people to opt out if they choose, if they chose to, was one of the strengths of GWER as well. Because I remember talking very openly and real earnestly about who is sacrificing what to move us to this next level.
Right.
And that was really very important. For me, at that point, I had not gone to college. I was a nursing assistant. Well, I just thought nobody is going to fire me from anything I can't get anywhere else at that point. But I worked at Shands at the time, and I remember being on the healthcare committee along with Mabel Dorsey and Alice Howard. Alice passed away.
Howard.
And Mary Webb, who was out in California setting the world on fire. She's writing and teaching at Berkeley, of course. Mary is doing it her way, wherever she is, I'm sure. But the thing of it is, when we met, we knew our job was big because it involved so many steps. But one of the steps had to do with the doctor's offices. And the second step was the hospitals. Mabel was pregnant with Rodney. She chose to stop going in the little back door.
Sure did.
And her obstetrician, and she was going in the front door. I was going to Dr. Black as my doctor on 4th Avenue, and I decided it was my last day in the cubby hole.
Right.
It was organized. We decided who was doing what.
Right.
So the same week that we went out to do that, I did go in the front. I was amazed that in the front there was a fish tank, and there were windows and magazines.
Right.
I just was amazed because all we had were 4 chairs in a little room about as big as a bathroom, and a window that opened up that you poke your head through to tell the nurse behind the desk that you were there. That was it.
Yeah.
And once we started in the front door, I never went back to that back area. Nobody else sent us away either, by the way. They sort of knew us by then.
Yeah.
That happened. Also, we challenged the dentist. There was a dentist on 2nd Avenue, almost across from where Lockyer General is now. I don't remember his name, but we went there. His challenge was he didn't see African American patients except on Wednesdays because he had to have time to sterilize his instruments. And I'm thinking, I don't know that you're not worried about a whole day sterilizing between them, but I bet they would like to know that. So anyway, black folk were going to Ocala to the black dentist.
That's right.
I was riding the
That's
Greyhound
right.
bus to go to the dentist in Ocala. Because we had a black dentist, but at some point we were in transition, and one black dentist for all of Gainesville, but others of us were going there as well. But we were able to do that. And then we come back to the big committee with our reports and where we needed to go, and we encourage others to do so. One of the dentists in town that I finally took my boys to, who are 46 and 51 now, they'll hate me for that one, but they were small. And my friend, I don't remember this member of GWER, but she and I were very close, and she was on the committee. She said, Vivian, if you want to take the boys to the dentist, why don't we try my dentist? And I said, okay. So she called and she asked the receptionist if this dentist accepted colored patients. And the lady was just flabbergasted. I remember listening and she just didn't know what to say. And my friend said, well, go and ask him. It was Dr.
Ben Samuels.
Not him.
No.
It wasn't him. This guy was on 4th Avenue, and it started with an M, Mercadante or something like that.
Marshawn?
Marshawn. Dr. Marshawn. And so they got him on the phone. He said, I take any patient that makes an appointment at my office. So we made an appointment for my boys to go there, and they loved it. He treated them like little angels. And besides, at the end of the visit, they could open the bottom drawer and pick out a toy. So they were his little special. They, to this day, they talked about him and how much they loved it. Years and years and years and years later, when I taught nursing, Dr. Marshawn's daughter came in as my student. I told her, I love your daddy. I mean, it was just so wonderful to have this generational connection. So that was a dental piece. But I think the most important piece for our committee was the hospitals.
Yes.
The Equal Rights Commission was there, but we, GWER, decided to challenge it. We are the ones who challenged it. I tell people, I don't care how much history you write, we are the ones who sat in that office, 4 of us, 2 black women and 2 white women, and said, you must integrate this hospital because you receive federal dollars under the Hill-Burton Act.
I remember.
And that is the federal act that says, if you federal dollars, you got it. And this man, after he turned 3 shades of red, there's nothing in this room as red as that man was when we told him that. He was just, I thought he was going to lose his breath. But he finally said yes, and we left. But what he did was to take the signs off the water fountains in the bathroom.
Colored and white.
The colored white sign.
That was one step, one small step.
A
But
small
but
step.
still, the black babies were born on this floor.
The third
white
floor was
babies
our
were born
floor.
on this floor. And those babies were transported up and down in the public elevator.
Yeah, I know. And my babies were born there.
Yeah, and when the ladies auxiliary raised money for sterilizers, they got 2 sterilizers, one for black babies' bottles and one for white babies' bottles.
Right.
You know, it was just absurd.
Well, not even more absurd than that is there was a baby, well, actually, black folk on the floor, third floor, because that was over the boiler room.
That's right,
And
right over the
AC.
boiler room.
One long hall for women and then one long hall big for men. And 2 little rooms, as I remember, adjacent to that where they put the babies in the little nursery. And I don't know if they had an isolation room or whatever that was, but I do remember my baby sister Cynthia was born, and when my mom brought her home, she was all full of heat bumps all over, and Dr. Black had said, well, just let them burst themselves and just what, you know, it was from the heat in that room. But when my son Delano was born, and he's 51 now, I was in the big ward with everybody else. My baby was in this little nursery, and I didn't get to hold him because with a curtain between us, the lady behind me had syphilis and was dying, and they wouldn't bring him in the room. But I was there. So when I finally was able to hold him, they took me out of the room, and then they didn't get you up in those days. You know, you're supposed to stay in bed forever. God, did we learn a lot. Anyway, they did get me out of the bed, into the hall in a chair, and brought my baby out for me to hold. It was terrible. It was terrible. So I had a lot of reasons to want to go back and see this man. So after we after we left, took the signs off and we talked with the human rights, Charles was on that board, about what's going on. The human rights said that yes, we may need to talk lawyer now. I think it was a lawyer out of Jacksonville they were considering for us. We went back for another visit to let them know that, you know, we had turned it over and these kind of things were going to happen. And I don't know the regression of when things happen, but I do know in 58 was my Delano. That's the one that I had to feed in the hall. 62, Craig was born. Craig was a premature baby, so he was taken right up to the premature nursery. By then, mothers were off of that 3rd floor and onto another floor where I guess all the new mothers were. But I was not able to get Craig because they didn't let you get preemies in those days. I hate thinking about this. This boy is 46 and I tear up every time I think about it. I did not hold my baby for 3 weeks.
Wow.
Never held my baby for 3 weeks. And when I called him my 4-pound preemie, he says, Mama, do you have to say that? I said, oh yeah, till you die, until I die. I have to say you're my 4-pound preemie because it's more than that story. They let me go, the day of discharge, they let me go up to the ward to look at him behind the glass ceiling. But I couldn't touch him because they didn't let you touch preemies at all. So this wasn't a black-white thing. This was a sign of the times. Then I went home and every day called the hospital and Dr. Breel because he always saw black children.
Yeah,
he always did. He is one pediatrician who never.
That's right. And I don't remember sitting in a different room
I don't
either.
I don't either.
He was right.
Unless it was an infection or something.
Yeah, EGH.
Right down the hall, down the road. And
Across
every
from
day
EGH.
I'd call and I'd say, Dr. Breel, can I see my baby? And he'd say, well, Miss Filer, he'd tell me, I've been over this morning, this is it. Then I'd call the hospital, they'd tell me. Then I called Dr. Breel back. Finally, Craig was 4 pounds, 14 ounces. And he said, Miss Filer, would you like to go and get your baby? He was supposed to stay to 5 pounds. They couldn't take me anymore.
Vivian, you said one thing. He said, Miss
He did, in those days.
You know what?
Yeah.
That was unheard of.
Yes, it was.
You were Vivian, Cora, and that's
right. That's right.
Never addressed you by your last
That's a
name.
big point.
Well, you know, the interesting thing with Alachua General Hospital, of course, is that it was owned by the county government. And the county government was fighting with the doctors. And there was this great battle raging. And we had 2 county commissioners, G.M. Davis and Sid Martin, that were
yeah, I
friendly
remember
to
them.
our cause.
Yeah.
That's right.
And the 2 of them said, we'll get even with those doctors. We'll appoint Jean Chalmers to the Board of Trustees. So here was this, so here was this committee member who caused so much trouble, and they put me on the board. You should have seen the faces of the men when I walked in. And I stayed on that board up until 1982.
And we knew who we could count on.
Yeah.
Right.
But they're always, that's why when I talk about GWER, I talk about the fact that we had women, strong women, in strategic places who were not afraid to really go to battle. It took a lot because, you know, they weren't calling you all nice names in the newspaper. And you weren't discussed in favorable ways in other places either. But the fact is we created, I think, a bond and we're empowered because of what we shared with each other. And we could get on the phone. And we did sit in these rooms and you talk about just stopping smoking. Was it Beverly?
Joan Henry.
Joan Henry.
Joan
And Joan, because Joan had been, but I remember the nights in those rooms when smoke was a complete haze. I mean, there was a balloon above our heads from the smoke.
And you know, I would go from GWER meetings over to the Millhopper Nursery School where nobody smoked.
I know, you smelled like a smokestack. You hadn't had a cigarette.
And I was at a Millhopper Nursery School meeting the night that Martin Luther King was killed. And the phone call came and I was told I was the only person in the room that cried. And I just wished I could be back in the smoke-filled room
Where people really knew they were real people. Yes.
And I've always remembered that. When I see someone who smokes, I say, okay, you probably have a big heart.
That's right. They really did.
I have a question. Vivian, in the panel discussion at the Matheson, you had a quote that I thought was pretty interesting. And it was, just because it might appear on paper doesn't mean that it actually gets done. And in the process of desegregating the Alachua County schools, the devil is sort of in the details. People can say they're going to desegregate, but there's a number of ways that they can slow the process or frustrate the process. So I was wondering if you guys had any comments on that, or there was one specific personality, William Tiny Talbot. I wonder if you could talk
Cora,
about
do you want to talk?
Well, one thing I remember in particular was the fact that we were paid, colored teachers were paid less money than white teachers. And you know how we found that out? By talking, being friendly with teachers, as we would meet in the, what's the name? I can't think of that place, but we charged all of our supplies and everything.
Like your district store. Was that on?
On University Avenue.
Yeah, I don't remember the name of it.
I can't remember, but it was one of our biggest office supplies at that time. Do you remember?
Well, Chestnuts was there.
Yeah, it was
I believe it was.
But
I
this
believe it
was-
was Chestnut.
Did you charge a chest?
I think so.
Oh, okay.
We got to pay for our school supplies, and the teachers from different schools would come in,
On Main
and they
Street.
say, "What do you do when what do you pay? Excuse me, but what are you paying for?" So our supplies that we use for children. Say, are you paying for those out of your pocket? I had a large bill there every month, and other teachers, where we would buy the materials that we were taught in college to use with the children. We had to pay for it. And they said, you shouldn't be doing that. They said, the school system is supposed to be paying for that material for you to work with the children. Well, it took a while for it to change, but I think maybe some of the teachers, some of the white teachers over at Kirby Smith, I think they kind of entered in and spoke up for us, and over at Aquin Jones, we soon stopped doing it. And then I think Williams and Duval elementary schools maybe got that privilege a little bit later, not a long time, but I believe Aquin Jones received it because we had this connection with these teachers, especially over at Kirby Smith, and they would tell us what was happening. All right. Another thing that I remember during that time was the salaries. They were unequal because they would tell us how much they made, and we'd say how much we made, and they say that's ridiculous. Now these are special teachers, and I think we met there when we got paid off. We got met there almost on purpose so that we could talk to each other, because that was the only time. It wasn't like meeting with you guys, women for equal rights. This was just a kind of off the record meeting, because when we met with you, it was kind of like a big sorority, a sisterhood. But this was people just feeding us information, because they were learning and we were learning.
They were your Watergate.
Yeah. We were learning from them how we were not treated equally, and they were learning how it worked on the other hand, because they were unaware that this was happening. We came back to the then formed education committee. And they thought they would investigate, because you can't go by hearsay. You got to really know what you're doing. And Jean, will you remember of that group that went up to the school board after hours? You had them to stay up there after hours so you could go and look at the records and see.
Right, and I think, was it John Duke that let us in?
Somebody, John Dukes or somebody, let you
I
in
think
there.
John Duke let us in
And
there
let
to
you
look at
see
those
the
records.
and found out that what we had told you was actually true.
Right.
That we were not getting equal salaries.
Right. There was no sunshine laws in those days.
That's right. That's right. And I remember having to babysit, not having to, but volunteered to babysit for some of the rest of you guys that had babies, to free you up so that you could go over there in the evening and check those records. And a lot of times we couldn't be out front because nobody listened to us.
Yeah, right.
You had to go in and see that things were done and discuss the situation and what was happening, and we had to just be supportive to you. And sometimes that included babysitting while you went to take care of the business, because if we tried to, nobody had any time for us.
And
Let me check the calendar, secretary.
Yeah.
Let me check his calendar. Well, he's filled out for this time. He's filled out.
Yeah.
Well, I don't see where I can give an appointment.
And this went through right into the 70s, because I remember when I was working at the crisis center, I remember going through the records too.
Right.
And I remember going up speaking in front of the school board, and I was working for the county government. The county commission called me in and said, as long as you're on the payroll of the county commission,
you cannot do that.
go and scold the school board.
One hand does none what the other hand's do. Well, you know, I think those are really good examples of just because it's written doesn't mean that it's done. The other part of that is finding out that it is written. And I think somebody like Mr. John Dukes would have been the person who would clue you in, because I remember his first teaching job. He was a Lincoln High School graduate who went to the service and to college, and he came back into Gainesville with the idea that he wanted to move his school forward, which he did. He, for the first time, organized our first national honor society. And those of us, Janie Williams, Vivian Filer, that whole group were the Lincoln High School's first members of the National Honor Society. He made a way to take us, because somebody had done this, get a bus to take black kids from a school on a trip. He took us to Tallahassee, to the legislative sessions. We went to the Senate and the House of Representatives. Under the guise of doing that, he also planned that to be the very night that they had a play on campus, Carmen. I never will forget that. And we were able to go see Carmen Jones. Not only that, he was engaged to Bernice, and she was at college at FAMU, so we were able to go on a picnic where he brought his fiancée, Bernice, who became his wife. So for us, I mean, that was unheard of. We'd never been on a trip. We had been on a bus. We didn't have a clue as to what happened in the House of Senate, House of Representatives. Had never been on a college campus, had no clue what it meant to go to a stage play. So in that one weekend, he tied all that. That is the kind of thing that John Hughes brought back to Gainesville. Now, he continued on with that. When we graduated as being his first class, we were the first group that he led into organizing into an alumni group. So every year, the class of 1956, every 5 years, had an alumni celebration up until we celebrated our 50th year a couple of years ago, and that was our last one. He always came to speak. He never stopped reprimanding us. He never stopped telling us what, but he always did. Out of the night that covers me, black as a pit from pole to pole.
That's right.
I thank whatever gods may be for my uncomfortable soul. He meant that.
That's
he meant
right.
for us to have uncomfortable souls. But you know, Cora, my hat goes off to all of the teachers like you who out of their pocket, not only did you take funds out of your pocket, you took love out of your heart, you took concern because you were in a place where our parents weren't, you were educated, our parents weren't. That wasn't a divide. It was a layer on. So our parents did what they did at home. You added the zest once we were in school. We know that. We know that the Mabel Dorsey who taught us to make these Hungarian dishes we'd never heard of actually bought the items out of her pocket. She had a little store that let her get it on credit to the end of the month when she could pay for it. These are the pieces of the pie that black teachers did that nobody knew about. I used to go to school, I never believed you should comb your hair. That was just an unnecessary art. My sister did. My mother went to work early. She thought I did too. I just thought that was a waste of my time. You see what kind of hair I got. So when I got to school and my hair wasn't combed, not Miss Walker, who was her counterpart? Miss Daniels. Marie Daniels. She loves me because I was always smart. I was just very, very lazy, and I hated combing hair because it hurt, and I just didn't think that was a necessary art. She always had a comb and brush in her closet, where she would spray with something, and then she'd take me in the closet.
And she was.
She didn't want the kids to pick at me, so she'd take it.
Because they would pick at you.
She didn't want me, because other kids didn't have my idea of what it took to groom, and so I was like the one on the outside. But over and over and over, we heard those stories. That's why I know that the sacrifices that the teachers made in those meetings and the things that they brought to the forefront really made a difference. Also, another story, health related, was the fact that I heard this from one of the nurses. I don't know if it was Mrs. Woods, because she was there a long time. When we acknowledged her presence about 20, 30 years ago, she spoke of Dr. Banks, who was just like the Zion of doctors.
Right.
And I mean, they talk about his skills in the OR, but his skills were everywhere. And she recounted a story about a black kid who needed an incubator. And he bought it out of his own pocket to put down in that little room for that baby, because otherwise there would have been no incubator for that baby.
I have a question. Was there any intimidation on the UF campus of people who were involved with civil rights? Were jobs threatened at all, or tenure put in jeopardy by your activism?
Did your husband tell you to stay home?
The husband of our president was Marshall Jones, and he essentially lost his position at the University of Florida because of it. He was the faculty advisor to the Students for Equal Rights. And his wife, Beverly Jones, was one of the founders of the Gainesville Women for Equal Rights to help support Marshall students. And my husband could tell you the whole story about that. And Bob Caney, he lost his job. There were people who lost their jobs at the University of Florida because of involvement. Don Harmeling, he had a job at the library, and he was arrested up in Quincy, I think, on a demonstration, and his grant was taken away. A lot of the students lost their student aid. They weren't expelled, but they lost their student aid, they lost their grants, and for some of them it meant they couldn't keep going. The faculty wives, of course, didn't have any problems because we didn't have jobs. There was the old rule in the state of Florida and many states during the Depression was you could only have one member of a family work for the government because they wanted to spread the jobs as broadly as they could across all of Florida. So that was still the practice at the University of Florida. So if one person worked for the university, another member of the family would not get a job. So you had all these overeducated women that couldn't get a job, had time on their hands. was the worst decision the state ever made because it meant we all had time to become radical. If they'd given us jobs, and indeed, with GWER, as soon as we all got professional jobs, the organization sort of petered away.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the manpower was gone.
Yeah.
The other side of that, on a lesser, not a lesser, but on another level, was that jobs in homes for Black women as maids in University of Florida homes with professors was big. I mean, a lot of women left whatever side of town to go into the home of a Black faculty person to be the maid. So that was real important. And in some of those instances, I know that they were told it was that your daughter out there doing this, or were you involved in things that were civil rights related? And those were trying times for some people on that level. I don't think it stopped anybody, but because my mom was one of those, and I never stopped.
That went into white
as a maid.
family, as a maid.
Yeah, but then the other side,
Yeah.
Rosa Williams was Jane Sterrett's maid.
That's right. That's right.
Jane got Rosa into the Council for Human Rights. And
Yeah.
I remember Rosa had talked with such a stutter, she could hardly talk. And Rosa would stand in the kitchen rather than come out and meet with us all. And Rose and I were appointed to a covered dish committee, and that's when the two of us became friends, 1959. And I remember saying to Rosa, but what if everybody brings meat, or everyone brings a salad? She said, if you're doing the Lord's work, he'll straighten out the food.
It's worked every time, hasn't it?
It's worked every time.
And she knows how to straighten up food.
Yeah.
Yes. She worked at Bell Nursery as a cook for a long time there.
Sure, yeah.
She was a great help.
Yeah.
That's another big empty spot as far as African American children were concerned, because there was no organized daycare. We kept them in homes, which really was a good thing. When we think about, we always think we're better off but sometimes we're not. Having in my family, my mom worked at that time, but between the three sisters there was a sister at home, and we passed the children around, including the cribs and the clothes they wore. Because the boys were like a year apart between the three sisters. But as far as organized daycare, which had its value, we didn't have a lot of that. But I do remember when they opened the daycare center, Mr. Leonard, what was Leonard's mom? Miss Bell.
Jackson.
Jackson.
But she was there.
Miss Bell.
Miss Bell.
Daycare center. That was a big deal. Yeah, my son was one of the first ones to go, and I have pictures of him, Delna, when he was in parade and all. And there we started organized daycare, which was great.
My girls went there.
It was Bell Nursery that inspired us to integrate United Way.
I do remember that.
And United Way would only fund white organizations.
That's right.
Well, to be a member of United Way, all you had to do is contribute.
Yeah.
So a whole group of us contributed money to the United Way. And then came the annual election of officers, and we all marched up there with Rosa. We were all sitting in the audience, and they presented the slate. Any nominations from the floor? Nominate Rosa Williams. Second. All in favor, aye. Rosa United Way. And Bell Nursery got United Way funding.
That's right. And that's the kind of strategy that always worked positively for us. Because they weren't going to give it. You had to go in and get it.
Right.
You had to strategize how to get it. And that's how we did. I know that when we were doing the whole health thing, one of the issues we were talking about was health insurance and those things, and I won't call this name because I don't know where these people are now and what their stances are, but there was an insurance agency that was giving us trouble, and we needed to talk because we needed to go into that office and sit. And I was working with another person on my committee. She was white, and she and I had talked about which issues we would cover, how we were going to handle this. And she decided we'd get an appointment, her separate, they weren't going to know where to go. She had her appointment with him, but I had called to make my appointment. She said she had to wait to get in, and when she did, they had the appointment. And then before she left, I called, and I couldn't get him on the phone, this gentleman. And so I waited an hour, and I called back. I still couldn't get him on the phone. And she told me later when we met, she said, Vivian, when he heard your name, he got physically ill.
He didn't want to
He had to
talk
go to the
to you.
bathroom and be physically ill. He never did get well enough that day to talk to me, but I called the next day. So he eventually did have to speak with me. But the idea, see, talking to a black woman on an equal basis was not something the white men did.
That's right.
Not all white men, you know what I'm talking about, the ones who thought I'm the power. And they couldn't handle that. Well, I have never had a problem with that because I'm just talking to another person as far as I'm concerned. I don't look at hierarchy and roles and I want to be respectful always, but I do think I have something to say. And so actually I have to tell you, I was getting a little bit of pleasure out of the fact that this man was physically ill, though I cannot lie and say that was upsetting me at all. The fact that he had such a negative connotation, I knew that hopefully this will give him a wake-up call. But I pursued, and finally I did get the visit in, and we had the conversation, and I walked away with what I want. But he had to work on it. I think he's had some mind change since, and I do think he's better off for that. But those were the kind of things you just never knew. And Wilson's department store on the corner down there now where the Welcome Center is. You could go in Wilson's department store and look at their clothes. If you want to try on a hat, they'd rush in
And put some type
to
of.
cover your head up.
Cover your head up.
But you couldn't before you put their hat on.
Before you put the hat on,
Yeah,
for
you
fear
can look at their
some
feet.
white person would come by and.
Well, it was the only
Try it
store that would
on.
let you try on a hat, period.
That's true.
I mean, you
That's right.
at the other hat shop down the street. They
Was it
wouldn't-
Bob's
they-
or something like
I can't
that?
They wanted you to buy the hat without trying
They
it on.
wouldn't
yeah.
let an African American try on a hat.
Yeah.
But, you know, you were talking about health. Remember when we investigated the Department of Welfare? First, we found out that one of the county commissioner's parents were on welfare. And so we thought, well, we'd really like to look at the rolls and see who's on welfare. And we never could. Every time we went, I won't mention her name, but every time we went, there was some reason we couldn't see the rolls. And then we heard that she was off at a convention in the Bahamas for welfare directors. And we said, right, put on our white gloves, went down and said that Miss So-and-so had said that we could come here and pick up the policy of the welfare department. And so the girl said, oh, okay, here it is. And so we sit down and read the policy, and Alachua County Department of Welfare is to serve the needs of the poor white people of Alachua County. And so we went to Sid Martin and G.M. Davis and said, here's the policy.
Yeah, poor white people.
Get rid of her. And they said, okay, we'll get rid of her, but we need another vote on the commission. If you guys will go out and help get Jennings or Jenkins, Johnson? What was his
Must
name?
have been Ed Jennings.
Edgar Johnson. If
Oh,
you'll
Edgar
help us
Johnson.
get,
Okay.
if you'll help us get Edgar Johnson elected,
Yes.
we will fire the director of welfare. So
Yes.
we said, you're on.
Yes.
And we made little walk maps. Grace Knight helped us with that. We went door to door campaigning for him.
Right.
And he got elected, and they fired the director of welfare.
Yep.
And that's how we got the welfare department integrated.
Yeah.
But everything we got
Everything.
integrated took intelligence, hard work, chicanery, and a lot of acting.
Sure did.
And
Sure did.
Perseverance,
Oh, yeah.
just
Oh,
the
yeah.
perseverance, not to let it go.
And then when we took on the state welfare department, it was just as bad, but it was statewide. We did research. We researched welfare policies in Holland and Canada and just all over. And we'd go up to Tallahassee. I remember we had a Pabst Blue Ribbon beer box, just full of file folders. And there we were with our rubber tongue sandals and our little cotton dresses. And when we would go up, we always went up as an integrated group. And when we drove through Perry, if a black person was driving, the white people would duck down. The white person was, the black people would duck
right,
down.
right.
Because it was
Supposed to
not
be-
safe to drive through the town of Perry with
Right,
black and white
that's
people.
right.
Yeah,
Not at all.
but, gosh, I
That
can't
reminds me
remember
of
the
driving Miss
head,
Daisy.
the head of the committee was a League of Women Voters woman from Tampa, I can't remember, but she was wonderful to us. And we got to the point that a couple of nights before every committee meeting, they call us and say, what do you think of these wordings? What do you think of this idea? So we really
You had an
helped.
impact.
We changed it then to the HRS, Human
Resources.
Relations.
Whatever. Human resources.
Okay.
And we really helped, the GWER members really helped write that state law.
Did you discuss the merits of different kinds of tactics? And did you ever consider civil disobedience? Were there ever moments of doubts about the effectiveness of civil protests, petitions, and lawsuits?
No.
Really, we really worked hard to stay within the guidelines. We knew how far to go, and we didn't really cross the line as to breaking the law. It was more or less the white people going out, the white women going out and getting the information and working on the problem. And then when it was legal for us to cross the line, and if there was a line, that's when we did it. Is that the way
it
you
was a
say
matter
it?
of being a presence, that
Right,
this group
right.
became a presence, that then people backed off again before they would be too aggressive about dealing with us. And I remember the night that, I don't know whether you all were there, when the GWER board meeting met at my house, and to entertain Chief of Police Joyner. And he came in and walked in, and the place was full of the board at that point. There were 26 of us there, and he walked in, and his eyes got like
that. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. He couldn't believe it.
And he had been very. It was hard for him because he was caught inside of the good old boy network in so many ways. But when I had persuaded him to do something about what they were doing in Atlanta in community policing, and he sent one of his lieutenants up to get training in this, and then put him in some, I forget which part of the community he put him in, but then he brought him that night over to introduce us around and get this established. But he was trying to move into, he was using us as a wedge, which he could move in behind and do a few things that would not pull him apart when he went back to what was a very racist department. I remember Cora coming to one of the meetings and telling us about having been, were you asked to leave your car, or did the officer just yell in at you, girl, why don't you move your car?
Yeah, move that thing.
Move that
thing.
But I remember that meeting, or was it the next one, where we had then done some research on what he was paying the sheriffs. And we compared it with other sheriff departments in more progressive cities. And we presented him with this payroll, and we said, a man can't support a family on what you're paying them. And he said, oh, really? Is it low? I didn't know. You see, he was a wealthy man. And he didn't know that you couldn't live on $2,000 a year. But I remember he was genuinely shocked that he was underpaid. And of course, you get what you pay for. So he was getting some pretty rough people that were bitter because they were underpaid. And they were probably poorer than you, Cora, as an underpaid African-American school teacher.
Yeah, that was cool.
At that time, the white sheriffs were probably making less, so it was interesting times.
Well, it really was some interesting times. When my husband started to teach, I don't know what white teachers were making, but my husband's first teaching job was in 1961, and he was making $400 a month. I don't know how that compared. It doesn't sound like much money, but I was a nursing assistant. I was making $200. So based on the times, I guess it wasn't too bad compared to what other people were doing.
I started in 50, and I was working in Hawthorne. I worked there a year, and I was making $300
a month.
$300 per month.
But you know, back to your question, a few of our members did go to jail. but not as members of GWER for other activities.
And another piece of that is other organizations were doing things and they knew that we would be supportive of them in some way. And sometimes it did mean that we would march with them, not so much as GWER, but I think maybe some of us may have, but we would join in with them. Because I remember when the teachers were striking and they met down at the theater and spent it for salaries and all.
Right. We all marched.
Yeah, we all marched for that.
Yeah.
That's right.
And I remember, I don't know what this other incident was, but I remember my husband calling home from work and saying, I understand there's going to be a march on University Avenue. They're going to sit in the center of University and Main Street. Please don't let me see you on the 6 o'clock news. I said, well, don't turn on the TV because if they march and sit, I will be there. You know, you couldn't say it out of one side of your mouth and not work through it on the other side if there was a
And
chance
that's
to
when
do that.
Suleg went to jail.
That's when Suleg went to jail. Yes, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
So I didn't make it to
Yeah.
jail, but
Yeah.
I'm always out there trying.
Now, I think when David went to jail, it was with the student government for equal rights, wasn't it? David, what organization sent you to jail?
That's a different story.
Oh, yeah, but it wasn't GWER, but it
It
was,
was not organizational.
oh, it wasn't organizational, oh, it was just,
Jan Harmerling and Brownie had gone and sat in jail. Dr. King was there, and they wanted white people, weren't white bodies, that weren't getting any attention. And so the two students were both members of GWER, of the student group for equal rights. And then because they went, then faculty went, Marshall Jones and Jim Brown and several others. And because they had gone, then several other officers went. And Jean and Felicity Trueblood were ready to go next week. But this was not organization.
yeah, right, okay. So I think most of the jailings were just individuals going off,
There
getting
were,
into trouble.
there were other ways in which we had interactions back during the, when the rest of the country was pretty much on fire after some of the shootings, some of the assassinations. And we had a member who had a little restaurant on Fifth Avenue, Sarah McKnight. And I came back from the summer having left as vice president of GWER and having come back in September to find that the president had moved away by Athens. And coincident with that was some of these things going on. And Sarah called me one afternoon and said, you have to know something. There are carpetbaggers coming from some of these northern cities where they've had a great time bagging up goods in these fires that have been going on. They're thinking about setting fires here in Gainesville. And they're thinking about the city manager and the, let's see, Gene Whitworth was
The district attorney.
District attorney. And there was one other person, a judge, I don't remember. It was before Article 5, so I don't remember what the judge was. Anyway, you have to know that they're here, and I can't talk any longer. Goodbye.
I can't talk any longer.
Yeah, and that's how we got the news around.
Right.
What do I do?
Yeah, it's in your hands.
So, back to see Chief Joyner again. And said, I have no idea where this is all coming from or how much truth there is to this, but this is what I'm told by somebody who has big ears where there's a lot of talk. And so I'll leave it with you to decide what you're going to do about it.
Yeah.
But there was a tremendous amount of interaction, and we did have some fires.
Yeah.
And
I remember.
I think it was Green was the city manager at that point. It was his house, or
I don't remember.
Was
You
it
know,
Jean
Carlene Hussey's house was bombed. Remember, Carlene was the attorney that helped us with so many of our, she'd write our amicus curiae briefs for us and help us. And her home was bombed. And I've
Was it in
never
that era?
quite known what happened there. It was about the same time Carol Thomas was in prison.
And that was a little later
That
in
was,
the 60s.
let me see, Kim would have been 2 years old, because I took care of Carol Thomas's children the summer she was in prison. And so that'd be about 39 years ago.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So
It was easy to
So
get
around,
put in.
wow, that was
The
60s or 70s,
Yeah.
early
That
70s.
was in the 70s, I think.
You could get put in prison for just eating at a lunch counter
yeah, that'd
downtown.
be 1969. I remember that.
Yeah.
It was the
Right.
summer of
Sounds
69.
Right. Still.
I like the fact that we were really a group of diversified women, college-educated women, women from grassroots, women who worked at menial jobs, women who were entrepreneurs, all with the one desire, and that was to integrate this city in a way that allowed all of us to come out of alive, but to move it forward. It was University City. It should have been more progressive than it was, but I was telling you the story earlier about the integration of Elijah General. The same day that the group of us met at Elijah General, we drove over to Shands Teaching Hospital, which had opened in 58 or something like that. It opened with the integrated floors, so they wouldn't separate the surgical patients by putting them on the floor. All surgical patients were on the same floor, but they could not share a room. Two races couldn't share a room, so you couldn't put a black patient in where there was a white patient. And I worked at Shands as a nursing assistant at that moment. And I remember the stories. The nurses would stand at the desk making this decision on where to place the patient. And we go through the archive of questions to ask. You know, does a patient have anything infectious? No. Is the patient same gender? Yes. Does the patient need more activity? You know, all the things that nurses have to think of. And when none of those things prevent the two of them being in the same room, decision would be made to place them in the same room. Except in this particular instance one night, the one girl's 8, one's 10, one's black, one's white. And the nurse, Sally, I'll never forget Sally's name. She'll be glad I don't remember her last name. But she said, but we can't. I said, down on West Wing, there is a room with an 8-year-old in it. It fits the bill. Nursing assistants weren't supposed to have much mouth, except it was me. And she said, well, we can't. I said, are you expecting that this baby will go to sleep in her room with her black roommate, and during the night, the black is gonna seep down off the side of the bed and make its way across the room and infest this child on the other side of the room? What is your problem? And she was so mad at me. She was so mad at me for that. But we had discussions. I said, we really need to talk about this, but that happened before. So this group of us went over to see the administrator at Shands, sat down with him and gave him the same speech as with Elijah General, you know, the Hill Burton speech. And immediately, they made a stamp. It went on their admission sheet that says we comply with the federal laws on integration. But that was fine for the stamp. But this is one of those, because it's written, it's not necessarily done. So every floor, every black nurse had to fight. They first had to know it existed. Then they had to fight to have it carried out. Because there weren't that many black nurses. Those of us who were fighting were housekeeping and aides and whatever, because we just didn't have that many black nurses. I know with my floor that we may have had maybe 1 or 2 over a period of time of black nursing. But that didn't stop me, because I knew that these children who ate together, family style, in the playroom every meal, played together like children play together. They get rid of the guff, they play together. But they couldn't share a room at night, it had to be done. But every floor, every black nurse there could give you another story, race-related, that I don't know about, because it had, until it became, and then on the other side was the patient, who absolutely refused to be in that hospital room with another patient. Then you find out where your administrative staff stands, because if it didn't work for the nurse on the floor had to call the next level, and the next level. Somebody had to stand behind the policy. So a lot of times when you had people working in the right direction, they would say, these are your options. This is your room, or you may choose to be discharged. Those are your options. We don't cater to moving you because you can't stand to be in an integrated room. And Shands is a special hospital. I mean, you are good to have gotten in here, period. And these are your options. And so parents would, but you know, I remember the anger. I remember taking care of the patients, even after I graduated in '72 and went back to work as a nurse on the floor. And I'd walk in the room and they find out that I was their nurse. They wanted somebody else.
That's right.
It's midnight, sweetheart, I did. It's either me or no nurse. And one night a doctor came on the floor, more than once, but this one I remember. I was the only black person at the desk. I had 3 aides up there, two white and 1 black aide, and I was taking my orders off. And the doctor walked up, looked at one of the white nurses and gave her a verbal order. And she listened. I didn't say a word. And then when he finished, she said, "But I'm not the nurse." And he said, "Well, where's the nurse?" And she pointed to me. He said, "Can you do that?" And I said, "I'm sorry, were you speaking?" I was not. I can't take an order that he gave to somebody else. So as far as I was concerned, he had not spoken until he was giving me a verbal order, which I verbatim would write, and then he signed. It wasn't. He was so upset, but he had to learn, and we had to do that over and over and over, always having to prove that yes, I am the nurse. I am the. But before that, you know what? When I wasn't the nurse and I was the aide, and they sent a white nurse, I was telling my little sweethearts what to do, be they black or white if they were new, because new nurses don't know it all.
That's right.
And those of us who've been aides forever, we were helping them make decisions that how to do these things, and that was okay. We still do that. That's what nurses do. But the fact is, they wanted to decide because I was of another ethnicity, I should not be the nurse.
I have another.
They did the same thing in the public school system. They would come in the classroom, and if you had a white assistant, you're lucky enough to have an assistant period. Well, they would always go to the white assistant to ask any questions about the class or what have you. "I'm sorry, I can't answer you. You'll have to go to the teacher." And you should see how some people would look.
Yeah.
They would be very disappointed.
Excuse me, we need to take a tape break here.
Okay.
That might be a good time to break. I have another question. How did your work with GWER influence your thinking on feminism? Was your activism on civil rights issues a sort of feminism in practice, in the sense that defending the rights of others was also a way of asserting your own rights as a woman?
I'd say yes to all of the above. One of the things that I've always been proud of, I'm one of 5 daughters, and my mom and my dad were the household. So we already knew women had power. I mean, we'd exerted that our life. My mother is a very strong woman, and my mother could do what we all knew our mothers in that era could do, raise a family, take care of home, do all of those external things that she did. They were difficult to do, but they were done. We had a healthy respect for our father as a man, and we knew that. But we knew that women were not given the chance outside in the world to do the things that they were capable of doing. They were not given the jobs, they were not paid, you had to have your husband do this, or, I felt those things personally. Being a part of a group of women who came together and had these thoughts and could strategize and plan and move ahead, I just thought it was the greatest thing to happen to me. I was a very young woman at the time. I won't say how young because I don't remember how young. The older I get, the younger I was. But anyway, to have that as my entrance way into, I think, really being a woman in charge was a good thing for me because I learned from so many levels of women who had done different things, women who walked different ways in life, women who had different expertise. And I think the whole business made me have the capabilities that I had beyond that point. To forge ahead, to do what I wanted to do, but to always respect the fact that woman power is strong power for me.
But Vivian, I was resentful to the women for not being so active in GWER and starting to be in consciousness raising things. And I felt that the job of civil rights or equal rights for African Americans was not done, and that all this energy was being drained away from our main cause into the feminist cause. And it took me a long time to cool down on this issue. I was angry with some of my friends for what I thought was abandoning the racial justice programs and going for the gender justice programs.
Well, I seem to have a different take on this because the way I was raised, my father looked at me and said, you can do and be anything you want to be. And it was always that way from the very beginning. And so it never occurred to me that there was this glass ceiling anywhere. I just went and did what I wanted to do. And I've always been a community troublemaker, I guess. So I've stepped into a lot of places that one wouldn't necessarily find whether one was male or female, black, white, or purple. But if something was wrong, being done wrong, people needed to be reminded, especially if they were public servants that had been elected to take care of everybody and were being very selective about who they took care of. They needed to be reminded. So from way back in high school, I've been doing things like that, and it never occurred to me that one had to be any particular kind of a person, except being offended by the fact that not everybody was working for the common good. So I've never experienced this business of there being an obstacle out there, and so it never has been a problem for me. But I've always gone to the cause of the moment being the one that we really need to address, the one where the greatest offense against humanity is being perpetrated at that point. So that's kind of where I came from.
Cora, do you have any thoughts?
Yes, I remember living through the times when you had to go to the back, go up to back doors, couldn't go in the front doors. White people, a lot of white people, and I don't want to generalize and say everybody, but the most of them wanted you to, if you had any questions or anything, or for any reason, or you worked the place, you had to go in the back door. And restaurants, you had to go around to the back in order to get served. You had to go around to the back and get food through a little cubby hole, a little window, and that's the way you were served. I remember having done domestic work when I was in high school, and this one lady that lived across from the library, and she was not able to do any shopping. She was not able to go to the library or anything, but she liked to read magazines. She would send me after school over to the public library, and the library then was down where the Matheson Center is. That was the first library that I can remember. And the post office was where the Hippodrome is. Well, when I would go, she would send me over to the library. She would always write a note, and she'd tell me who to give it to when I got there. And I would give it, I learned who this person was, and I would always wait for her. While I was going in up to the front desk of the library, people would just stare at me. I was just a high school girl. They would just stare at me. A few people didn't, but you could just feel eyes, you know, staring at you. I'd go up and give her the note, but when I gave her the note for the magazines that she wanted, the Times and what have you, I'd have to go back and stand by the door until she beckoned for me, or if I was looking around and she didn't get my attention, she sent them, either brought them back, and then I went on out the door with the material to take to this lady that lived right up there on University Avenue across from the library. And those are the kind of things that really got to me. And the post office, I didn't have that type of experience because at school I had learned that you stay in line and what have you, and at home too, until your turn comes. So they'd be lined up to the window of the post office when I wanted to buy stamps for her. And I would just go up my turn. But there'd be times even there that I would be standing there and somebody would just walk right on up ahead of me to the window and get their stamps or whatever business they had to do, as if I didn't even exist. And I didn't know, I was a child, I didn't know what to do about it. I just stood there and seized. I was just mad about it.
In reference, so I'd like to add more to the gender, civil rights, discussion, and that is African American women were so busy fighting for the rights to just live and be alive and to make the women's fight was of less significance to us. Not that it didn't mean something, but if you're talking bread and butter on the table, as opposed to the right to sit in the boardroom and talk, which we weren't in anyway, you have to take it all, I think, in perspective. And and the other part of that is we wanted equal rights for our men, who were the leaders that we loved, too. We wanted all people to get there, but we realized black men were at the lowest ebb on the totem pole. We couldn't just bypass that little fact to fight for the rights of women. We had a deeper hole to dig ourselves out of. And I always said I'm very proud to be a wife and a mother and a female in a household that has a male. And I'm very proud of all of those things. I want my husband to be able to get a job based on his ability. I want him to move ahead based on his ability. I want the same for me too, but I don't want me to get at the expense of him not getting there because of his race. So you see, it's not, and so we weren't as, I think, we weren't as visible. I wasn't. Even though if asked to say something, I certainly supported it in that way, but I wasn't trying to spend all of my energy there. Not when I was raising young men and I knew other young men who were going to prison and were doing all these things because they were minus the basic rights. So when you talk about it, the thing I always said was white women may have been born with gender equity, but they were always born white.
That's right.
Yeah, they were always born white. Black people were born black, and that's not going to change. And the divide was not even. So I always talk to people now about where we're going to get, why can't we stop doing this? Why can't we stop doing that? Why can't we just be together and be right? I always say, when are we going to play catch up? When are we going to cover the chasm from all of those years of have-nots and have-not dones and have-not achieved? And when we cover the chasm and get to some place where we have equalized the median, then we could talk about walking out even-footed, but we aren't there yet. And there's no sense in those of us who are fighting to get there to step back and say, oh yeah, let's just make it all right. Well, you don't just make it all right. You do what we did as GWER, where you fight for it to be right. It's not a dream, it is reality, and it's not over. You see, covert racism is worse than overt racism, because you got to dig that out. Then you got to wash it up. Then you got to dry it out, then you got to iron it out, and then you got to put it on the sun and see if it shines through. You have a lot of work to do with covert. And when I tell people that, I said, now wait a minute, there is institutional racism. Even institutional racism is joining not knowing that $2,000 a year wasn't enough. He just didn't know, the institution did that. But you can't live on that, you have to know. So you gotta go in with the mindset that the job's not over, and even though I want my daughters to get equal pay, I want also for my sons to be recognized equally.
That's right, and not be classified as boys.
Yes, right.
Never become, you can be 90 and you were still a boy.
The boy, uncle.
Uncle.
Oh, I hated that.
I did too.
I hated
And
rather than call you
women were
Mr.
girls, or gals.
Black gal was one thing you said.
Yeah, black gal. Move out the way.
Two more questions, and then I don't want to stop the conversation prematurely, so if we want to go on, we can. This is a related question to a topic we were just on, but after the election of Barack Obama, there was a lot of talk in the media about a post-racial era. To what extent do you think that era is upon us? And I think more importantly, what should be on the agenda of civil rights activists in the early 21st century?
I think I've just about to answer that
I think you
out of my seat, so if somebody else wants to.
Well, one of the things that happened on the election day, on the day after the votes were counted, I kept getting this picture of all of these white people who were standing suddenly without the shackles and the prisons of their inherited, culturally determined view of one another. And suddenly being free and not even knowing they'd been in prison. And how many there are, and how many takes, as everybody is individual, how many people are going to have to learn a new way of living, free, able to breathe, and didn't realize they weren't breathing. And I could just see this mass of people who are in this position of reorganizing their lives and the way they think and the way they do. And fortunately, this great gift to us of Barack Obama with someone who has such understanding and feeling and knew the problems already, knows how to deal with the people who are going through them. And it's just been such a blessing. It isn't all over, and there's still going to be these people who are closet racist, and they would be closet.
Some of them are not even closet. When I listen to Fox.
Yeah, the closet isn't there anymore, but people who have this need to put somebody else down are never going to be satisfied until there's someone they can put down. And if it isn't a matter that's visible, it's another visibility. When my mother grew up in New York State, it was Irish. The Shanty Irish, you were never supposed to have anything to do with them because somebody said so. And the culture determined it, and the people who were insecure bought into it. And the people who never had a chance to think about it bought into it. So it's just another measure of the fact that we've never gotten down to the problem, which is the people who are never allowed to be themselves, never find out who they are, and never feel free to be who they are. So they always feel insecure about it. And the only way that a lot of people deal with this is by putting other people down. End of sermon.
I thought that you spoke that very well, and I agree with you. I don't think we're going to know for another 10 or 15 years. I think the huge impact is going to be on the young black male. There's a whole lingo now on the street. You barack somebody, and that it's very positive. Or you'll say, "Hey, that's a barack," and so it's given them a whole word and a world to use for self-esteem and pride and to congratulate each other. And when you get middle school kids congratulating each other, that is rare because it's generally put down.
The other side.
You know, it doesn't matter if it's black or white or black on black or white on white. It's all negative, negative, negative. And now suddenly there is this kind of positive thing that's happening.
And thanks to public radio for putting that on so that we can all hear about this story.
Yes, yeah, but it's been going on all through the campaign. This is not a new story.
Yes, but now that we get a picture of it that everybody sees as a particular picture and separated out from that.
So I think we'll see a difference in our black youth, but I think we won't know for 10 or 15 years.
Well, when I used to like to listen to Fox News, but since the election and even coming up to the election, just campaigning, that was always this put down. And when it came to Obama, most of the news people would talk in terms of what his friends and how he associated with certain people. And I looked at it like this. With so much racism still existing, this was a young man that associated, he didn't push himself on to people, but people that wanted to associate with him, that's where he connected up. He connected with those people, but it didn't mean that he was taking on their attributes or anything like that. But he associated with them because they had something to offer to him at that particular time. And he knew how to sort out and take the good and leave the other alone. But now they're still throwing it back at him because he associated with this person or he associated. That didn't make him. He was made already. And he'd been taught the right thing. thank God for his grandmother that reared him. She had taught him right from wrong, and he knew what to grasp from that person or persons and what to let go. He knew when to hold them, and he knew when to fold them.
Well, you know, just to talk about the post-racism, I think what we are opposed is not having elected a black president before. That's what we're opposed. They've done that, and they've achieved that. I think you cannot take one circumstance, one situation, and use it as a measure point for the deep-seated racism that's in the United States of America. You can't do that. Now, I am really pleased with the strides that have been made. The election proved a lot to me. It proved to me that young people are out there thinking for themselves.
That's right.
Not only thinking, but they're acting on their thoughts. It proved that a lot of them have the right stuff and they're going to move us ahead. But we haven't gotten there yet because those young people who are doing all that movement, they don't know what we're talking about in this room. But this is history. They have to know history so we don't repeat it. May not in the realm that it was repeated, but in some realm it can be if they don't know it well. But they don't know it, and I know they don't, because I speak with them often, not every young person, but too many of them can't know our part, African American history, because it's not written. We want the school board to integrate Black history into the school's curriculum from K through 12. There is a written curriculum that's ready to do that, so that you don't spend all your time talking about Martin Luther King and Mary McLeod Bethune. Those are great people, but they are not the history. The history is day by day integration here. So when you read it, you don't have to say, oh, this was Black. You don't have to say it. It's just history.
That's right.
That's where I see us calling ourselves post-racial, when we do have a history that befits itself of telling the story of America. Now, we can go there, and we need to go there, but we need always to be cognizant of the fact that we are now represented in the White House by a woman who is stellar. I mean, my granddaughter wore her Easter dress with the shoulders out because she was Michelling in her Easter dress. And she's 6 years old. So, and now we have the first grandma who is going back to what I know grandma to be.
Yeah.
And that's the hierarchy, monarch who looks after the family, who does these things. That to me is very precious.
Right.
And a mother who is an educated woman who goes beyond just what we think of as a mother. She is a woman within her own rights who is a mother. She's a mother in her own rights who is a woman who knows other things. You see, that's who Michelle is. And she's married to this man who has his head on straight. So, and when we get all that together, I think we're going in the right direction. But let's not arrive too early. The train is still on the rail. It has not reached the station, and we should not try to propel it there without paying the price day by day, year by year, 10 years, 20 years. We need to pay the price. We need them Obamaized. We need the pants up. We need them looking at education as a great thing. We need everybody doing that, but it hasn't happened yet.
No.
Give it time. I think it'll happen.
That's a great answer. This is my last question, but feel free to continue. What was your proudest moment as a member of GWER?
Well, how many do we get to think?
How many moments do we get to count?
Yeah, that's right. Do we each get a
There's
different
so
one?
many.
You know, I think just having people recognize who we were and who we were for. I mean, even the commissioner saying, here are those damn women again. You know what that meant? That meant that we were doing something. We were a thorn in their side. So the accomplishments are many. I think when Gainesville realizes that the accomplishments of GWER, with the support of the Equal Opportunities Committee, all those, the support of the achievements of GWER really started and really did a lot of the work for integrating this great Gainesville of ours. So I guess my proudest moment is now. Looking back over the good that was done.
Yes.
I think my proudest moment was when I admitted to myself and to the members that poverty was our issue. I remember standing up and making a little speech, and it was the first little political speech I ever made in my life, and I was really nervous doing it because I'd been very much a behind-the-scenes kind of person. And it all came about with the poor African-American woman that I had been befriended and been working with, and she had a slew of babies, and she was washing diapers, pumping water out of the well and washing diapers in a bucket. And just down the street, lived in Rutledge, just down the street there was a washer dryer. Put your quarters in, and they wouldn't let her in. And I went and talked to him about this situation, and he said, Jean, he said, I'd let any any Negro in if their clothes weren't so dirty. But he said, I can't let her come and wash her diapers here because they're just too dirty. She can't wash them. I said, well, she really doesn't have a place to wash them. All she has is the well. And he said, well, somehow you women, you damn women, are going to have to do something to get running water into all of the Negro houses. And then maybe we can be more equal. And he was, you know, for just a funny little merchant, he opened my eyes. And I remember, we have to fight poverty. We can't deal with racism, something about poverty. And that's where we started with the welfare boards and understanding. And that's when we really pushed to get water over to the northeast. In the northeast part of town, there were privies in the backyard.
Oh, yeah.
Water didn't
Absolutely.
go there. And the League of Women Voters was a little bit more conservative, but they joined us in many things. And one of the wonderful things that they joined us on was poverty housing. And Nina Starr went and took pictures of all of these dilapidated, terrible, terrible houses, took them up to the city commission with a slideshow, and showed slides of all of these terrible shanties in which African Americans lived, and they were all owned by members of the city commission.
That's right. They were
Well, there
slumlords.
was a housing code, and water and sewer lines were then put into the African American neighborhoods. But all around Duval there was no sewer, no water. And so I think my big recognition was the day that I thought it's poverty. We've got to deal with poverty. And still today. You know, there's nothing that makes an African American look quite as white as money.
Green does it.
Green does it. Yeah.
Cora or
If I-
Jean?
If I had to speak to that, I tell you one thing that made me very, very proud and made me feel like I was more of a part of the community, and especially the black community, and I got that closer connection, was when we were deputized. And we went out to these, we went on Spring Hill, we went on Sugar Hill, we went out in northeast Gainesville around Duval, and we registered all of these people to vote. And that did something to me because I had never heard of anything like that. I didn't know it could be done, but thank God for, what her name, Alma Buffet.
Alma Buffet.
She let us be deputized, and we could go out and register people that were afraid to go to the poll.
Yes.
They were
wanna go downtown.
afraid because sometimes they would be threatened, if not by the poll workers, by somebody in the community or on the outside. And some of them were actually afraid to go. They heard something about what happened in Perry, what happened in Madison, or Levy County, and they were afraid to actually go to the poll. They in some places they would ask. I've heard that they would ask you. You'd have a big old jar there full of marbles or what have you, and to test your intelligence, you had to look at that jar and tell how many marbles were in there. That was a part of the test, and when you couldn't do it, you were illiterate and you couldn't vote. They had all kinds of techniques to keep you from voting. Sometime I've heard of people coming out from registering, and when they would register, the person that was back in the back area that was a black person was see them put where you just registered in the trash can and things like that. Those kind of things just for me, and I feel that GWER caused a lot of that to be changed, not only in Gainesville, but in the county, and just spread it.
Well, Cora, I think another proud moment for me was when you ran for city.
That's what I was doing, that was my next. And didn't you run for city?
We were so excited.
You can't have a copy?
Yes.
That's your whole.
This is the whole thing.
That is so generous. Can the camera see it?
She was honored by Pugh Hanahan's mayor a couple of years ago.
Yes, and November 11th.
I tell that story all the time.
November 11th was
That's one of my favorites.
November the 11th was declared Cora Roberson's
Oh,
day.
yes.
I was proud of that.
What year did you
We
run?
were so
Excuse me.
proud.
68.
And you didn't lose by that much. What was it?
900 and
You
some
did
votes.
very well.
I was running against Perry McGriff.
Yeah. And you were the first woman.
The first woman.
Were you the first African American?
Really the first woman to
Yes,
run for city
Yeah, I
commission.
knew.
Right after that.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't Reverend Wright, it was Reverend, lived in my neighborhood. You remember Reverend, can't think of his name, he was an AME minister. What year did he run? I don't know that that's important, but
I don't remember
but I think he
now.
ran, he was like the first, but that's been years ago.
But you sure did us proud.
Bless
Yes.
you. And you almost got me in trouble. I thought maybe Charlie, that's my husband, would have just thrown me out to the woods. Because the way this happened, I was working up at Kirby Smith, and I came home that afternoon, and it was about 5:30. And Jean, were you in that car? I forgot who the group were. But
I
it
don't
was
remember.
I think-
I don't
I
think
think
so.
Pat Ferris and probably Shirley Conroy.
It was a car full of women of equal rights waiting for me to come home. And
Oh,
when
yeah, no, I wasn't there.
when I drove up, the girls jumped out in the car and they hollered, "Hey, hey," and waving to them because they were used to being with them a lot anyway and with their children. And they asked me, "Cora, don't you want to run for city commission?" I said, "No."
And Joan
Not
Henry was
really.
one of them.
Oh,
Yeah,
I'm
Joan
sure
Henry.
Joan
I
was.
remember Joan Henry.
Yeah.
I said, "No." "Well, we want you to run." and blah, 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 blah. They just kept saying, "This is a time right now for you to run. And they'll be closing at 5 o'clock, so come on, let's go on down and get this." I said, I don't mind doing it because I think there's a need here. I said, but my husband doesn't get off from work working at Copper's Company because he hadn't gone to college then. I said, he'll be home at 5 o'clock. She said, that's too late. So you got to get there and register before 5 o'clock. And there I was between a rock and a hard place. But I decided, I said, I'll just suffer the consequences. I'll just go on. So I did that. Got the children back in the car and went down and I registered. And when I got back home, I think he was there. And I told him what I had done. And I told him it was at Women of Equal Rights' fault that I did that.
Don't blame me, blame them.
Blame them. I said I didn't have much time, and I'll withdraw if you don't approve of it. I'll just withdraw. He said, no, don't withdraw. If this is something you want to do, he said, I'll support you. And that strengthened our relationship.
Wonderful.
Not that it was weak, but that just kind of did something to me to say that I made a big decision like that without his discussing it with him, and he approved it. And so
Nice.
then it was run, buddy, run.
Yeah.
And you were a good couple, and I have to add this too to the story, because as the campaign heated up and Cora began to get larger and larger reception and backing, and suddenly Charlie said, and Cora told us this, looked at her and said, Cora, you can't get elected. I can't cook anything but pancakes.
Bless his heart.
So he's really the reason you didn't get Oh, bless his heart, he would have learned.
And Dr. Weber here at the university was my campaign manager.
Mm-hmm.
I had a lot of people backing me.
Yeah, I know.
Well, I have to look back on all of these things and say that that every day we were doing things. We walked through a lot of muck, and we fought a lot of battles, and we had a lot of successes, and everything every day was a day that felt hopeful and good that we'd done the right thing.
Right.
We were going in the right direction, and the grace of God and the guardian angels were with us.
With us,
That's right.
yes.
Yep.
Yes, yes.
Do you remember the time that we went down to in Levy County? I don't know what the name of the springs down there, but we went down there to a park, and everybody was surprised when we arrived in Levy County, an integrated group with all these children, black and white children. But our children were already dressed and for swimming.
Mm-hmm.
Our children got in the pool, and when our children got in the pool our
cleared.
integrated, the pool emptied on
Yep.
the other side.
Yeah.
They took all the white children
Yeah.
out of the pool.
They did that regularly in Gainesville.
They took all the white children out of the pool, and they couldn't swim together. But yet here was black and white over here swimming together.
Yeah. What
So
a
we
hand-
ended up just taking our children out and leaving.
Yeah.
We
What
were
a
so
handicap.
left.
But freedom now.
Yeah.
But freedom now.
But the whole
Some
system
people
was a
just take it for
handicap.
granted.
Yeah. The handicap for everyone.
It was, the double bathrooms, the double this and the double that.
That's right. It was really
It
a
was.
handicap.
It really was.
Yeah.
But you know what? The greatest loss of all of this is the humankind loss. Think of the generations who really were people who would have felt the humanistic part of each other
Yes.
had they not been practicing this whole slavery, enslaved people thing.
Right.
Because I know that people haven't changed. We still are the warm-blooded human beings we always were, except one ethnicity decided it was better than the other and therefore lost all that. Because when I tell my stories, I talk about the human love and warmth that African women brought to nurture European children. Because Europeans were a little more stoic and they didn't do. So when I do my stories, I say, think about this. This is an African American story, but it's about an African woman who came to America who is giving love to the children on the plantation that aren't hers. These are white children. But her children way on the back 40 over there somewhere that she left this morning know that she loves them too. So when the story says bedtime come for little boys, poor little lamb, you too tired out to make a noise, poor little lamb. You're going to have tomorrow's show. Yes, you told me that before. Now don't you fool me, child, no more, poor little lamb. The little white child heard that. When I do this in schools and white children, black children, they all hear it because it's all full of love. It's all Paul Dunbar's work. He wrote it from the words he got from his parents who were enslaved people. He wrote it as a free man, but he wrote it to tell the story.
Sure.
I have many of those of his that he talked about the nurturing and the love. So no matter where we go from here, if we stay in contact with what makes us human, which is love and sharing, the rest of it will just happen. Because we already proved we have the mind and the strategies to do it. But if you don't have it in here, that's my prophecy.
Well, I think with that, I'd like to thank everyone for making it out on this rainy afternoon. And I appreciate all of you sharing your thoughts and memories with the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program and future historians and the public at large. Thank you very much.
Well,
You're
I
welcome.
thank each of
Thank
you
you
for
for
making
asking
this so
us.
wonderful. Enjoyed it.
Fun.
Yeah, it was fun. It's fun to go back there with somebody who was there with you.
Do any of you were here when, after the voter registration took place and the next election took place And then Gene Whitworth called the grand jury to negate the election. I think that was when, what was his name?
Atkins,
Primrose.
Judge Atkins?
No.
Brian,
yes.
yeah,
It'll come up.
I'm not gonna remember names.
Brian Wynn.
Brian Wynn.
Byron Wynn.
Byron Wynn, yes.
Yeah.
And then when the grand jury was set up, then subpoenas went out to all the people who had been in the voter registration. And GWER and League of Women Voters were the ones who did it pretty much. And we had a board meeting at Joan Henry's house, and the sheriff's car pulled up at the door while we were having this meeting. And the sheriff's deputy had a big, thick handful of papers in his hand, and he came up and he said, "I'd like to speak to Miss Henry." So Miss Henry was at the door. She says, "I'm Miss Henry." And he said, "I have this subpoena for you to appear before the grand jury on this particular issue that of these people having been registered to vote improperly."
That's right, they sure did.
And so it would disqualify the election and whatnot. And he says, "Well, here's yours, Miss Henry. Now, I have quite a few other people here on my list here. Would you know any of these people?"
Would you know any of
And here we're all sitting inside, trying not to chuckle or make a lot of noise. And she looked through. She says, "I don't think I can help you." And we were until the sheriff got back in his car and started the motor.
You cracked up.
No, who was it? Joyner was chief of police. Who was the sheriff? Before him?
Crevasse.
Crevasse.
Oh,
yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
No, it was
Crevasse.
Joyner who was underpaid.
Was not-